Yes.
Alrighty, good morning. Thank you for your patience, and welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee meeting for April 19, 2017. I'll call that meeting to order. Introduction of late items. Does anybody have any late items? Mr. Memo.
Thank you, Chair. Under 6B, I'd like to add presentation by KPMG just before we talk about finance statements.
So 6B1. So KPMG. Anything else from anyone? And a motion to move the agenda as amended. Moved by Councillor Kidd, second by Councillor Holmes. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Motion to adopt the minutes for the regular meeting, March the 8th, 2017. Moved by Councillor Holmes, second by Councillor Yocum. Any discussion? Errors or omissions? Councillor Kidd.
Yeah, I just want to say I missed that meeting. I've had a couple of health issues lately. On the 8th, I was into the doctor's and couldn't make the meeting. I'm sorry, but I couldn't.
All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. There's no presentations. We have a pretty heavy agenda, so several items, but I'm sure that will warrant discussion and conversation. So if we could please stay on our topic as best we possibly can and advance our agenda in a timely fashion. So 6A is the Heritage Facade Grant and Fire Hall number 2. Mr. Minman, would you please introduce this item?
Thank you. The two grants here, and we're requesting the Finance and Audit Committee to recommend that Council approve 14,216 to Heritage Exit Grant to rehabilitate the exterior of Nanaimo Fire Hall number 2 building at 34 Nicole Street, and number 2 provide 9,316 Heritage Grant shortfall through the budget transfer from the Heritage Home Grant Program.
Thank you. Council, what is your pleasure? But I would like to think that you should probably do the sorry, Adam. So if that's okay and minimal to everybody, I'd like to have a motion put on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Brennan. Could you please identify what your motion is, Councillor Brennan?
Recommended motion.
And that's for number 1?
For 1 and 2.
For 1 and 2?
Yeah. I mean, I'll move them 1 and 2, but you can still call them in Syria. So as far as I know.
Second by Councillor Kipp. So we'll do that with Larry Adams. So number 1 is to approve $14,360 for the exterior rehabilitation of Fire Hall number 2 at 34 Nickel. So that's already on the floor. Discussion. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. To the staff, does this now, if they are on the registered list, it means if they take this money, that they can't do any improvements to the facade without going through the Heritage Commission now, or Heritage, or staff, let's see.
Mr. Schulberg.
Yes, thank you. So the question is, what committees would they go through? And
well, no, if they take this money,
yeah,
does that essentially put them on the list, and now they can't paint the building pink without our approval?
well, they already are on the list as far as the downtown heritage conservation area, so they would need a heritage alteration permit for any substantive external change, not necessarily a paint job or cosmetic things, but for substantive alterations to the building if they were filling in a window or creating a new doorway, that sort of thing. So they've been on that conservation area list since 1999. That's also what makes them eligible for the funding assistance in this case.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Schulberg while he's at the podium? Councillor Brown.
Mr. Schulberg, it says here the Heritage Facade Grant budget. I think it will be used to top up the other budget.
That's correct, yeah.
And so how much would that be in the Heritage Grant facade? And have we been talking to any property owners about how they might use this in this year? Because we're only 1/4 of the way through the year.
Yeah, usually these grants in the past have come in fairly early in the year, and we've used basically approximately 15,000 already for the previous grant approved about a month ago. We've got about 5,000 left in the overall $20,000 budget to use. And in this case, the project is really quite a high-profile project, a very important building, a high rater on our Heritage Register. I think quite worthy of the support. We were looking for where we could find money to provide the 50-50 cost sharing at which they're eligible for, and that's why we're looking at this transfer of money from one fund to another. We have had one Heritage Home grant this year. The last few years, we haven't had a huge amount of uptake on that program, so we thought it's probably logical to take that money, transfer it over. If we do receive any Heritage Home grants this year, what I'll probably have to do is say hold your project till the new year of 2018, and then we'll start from there.
Okay, but if you thought that the Heritage Home grant was particularly important, or there was some urgency to it, but then this year you would come back to us and
Sure,
try to identify
if there was a
another
very
source
key
of the
project that came along, but I think most of those projects we can hold till the beginning of 2018. So.
list. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir. I'll call the question then, if there's no more discussion on item number 1. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. And should I please have a motion on number 2?
It's on the table.
It's still on the table? Okay, thank you. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Moving on then, we will accept the presentation, Mr. Mema, from our KPMG representative.
Thank you.
As our first item on 6.
Thank you.
E1.
6A1. We'll have KPMG do a presentation, and then we'll talk financial statements after that.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, there's one up here, so. Oh, it doesn't work.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So we've issued an audit findings report, and I'm just going to report on the summary of what's in that document. In terms of our audit status, we are complete with the exception of a couple of items, which would be the discussions today with the Finance and Audit Committee, Council's approval of the financial statements, obtaining the signed management representation letter, and completing any subsequent events review up to the date of signing of the financial statements. So we sign our audit report on the day that Council officially approves the financial statements. Our audit report that we're anticipating issuing is a clean audit opinion on the financial statements. No issues in the audit opinion. We received full cooperation and support from management of the city throughout our audit. Areas of audit focus to note would be the risk around management override, which is required to be documented as a risk in accordance with professional standards. We have performed the required procedures to address this risk and found no issues in terms of the risk of management override. Critical accounting estimates used in the preparation of the financial statements relate to compensated absences, useful lives of tangible capital assets, and contaminated sites. We have assessed management's estimates and found no issues with the amounts that were recorded in the financial statements. The other item to note is that with the winding up of the NEDC, that those operations are coming into the city, and so NEDC will no longer be a separate organization that gets consolidated into the financial statements of the city. So going forward, the financial statements will not be labeled as consolidated and have two entities put together. In terms of our audit adjustments, we found there were two items that remain uncorrected. One relates to a retro payment accrual for the RCMP, which in new information that we received, we determined might be a little bit overstated or over accrued based on what the actual payouts are going to be. So we proposed a slight reduction in that accrual. The other item related to developer contributed assets that were recorded in 2016 but were actually received in 2015. Both of these items we did not determine to be material adjustments, and we agree with management that leaving them uncorrected is not material to the financial statements. There were no other adjustments that we identified and that management recorded. We issued a management letter, and there were no new control recommendations identified in the current year that were communicated in that letter. The letter did speak to kind of an update on previously reported matters related to management expense claims and expenditure policies at NEDC. Both of these items have been appropriately addressed by management, and there is a further change in the travel expense guidelines under development right now. We also note that management is working on a reserves policy to help facilitate the management of the reserves that the city has, and we're in full support of the development of that policy and would consider it appropriate to have such a policy in place. The last item we report on is just any kind of changes in accounting standards that are upcoming. There's quite a few changes to come over the next 3 to 4 years. The first ones will be applicable for the city's 2018 financial statements, and they relate to related party transactions and inter-entity transactions, assets, contingent assets, and contractual rights. And we'll work with management to help implement those new guidelines in the 2018 financial statements.
All that? Thank you. Do you have any questions for our audit? Councilor Kim.
Yeah, regarding management override, you found no indication of individual or aggregate or accumulated concerns over management override on any of the subject matter.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, and follow up if I can. On useful life, the calculation, which is page 6 of your report and our page is here, page 57. Could you explain the useful life of tangible capital assets for me? Explaining what they are and
Yeah.
give me the reason. Because I have a question for the valuation here and our total valuation of all of our assets.
Okay.
If we have a $3 billion checklist or a $2 billion checklist, here we're at $681 million.
Yeah, yeah. So the gross value of your tangible capital assets is, or the cost value is close to $1 billion. The number in our report is the net book value, which includes the accumulated amortization. So what we have to assess is the estimate over the useful life of your tangible capital assets that results in that amortization booked against the assets. So the useful life of assets is determined by management, and we've found that it was sort of what we would expect based on what you would typically amortize those any of your specific assets over. So there would be sort of industry standard useful life or rates that's applied, and we did not find any issues with the estimated useful lives that management has used to book the amortization.
Okay, so the valuation, the factuality that they used works out. So based on this, and if we have $1 billion in assets and we're at 680 million, then I think my car is worth more than it really is. Thank you.
Well, these would be accounting. These are accounting values, right? This isn't fair value.
Fair value.
Yeah.
If I had to sell the city, that's all I could get for it.
No.
Money. Thank you.
Any other questions? Motion to receive, presenter, please. So moved. Moved by Councilor Collins, seconded by Councilor Costello. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Then we'll just move straight into the 2016 annual financial statements. And Mr. Mehmet, if you'd like to proceed, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to make an amendment to the recommendation, but before I do that, just want to recognize the work by Laura and Jenny and their team and the rest of the city in getting us to this point in terms of the audit. And so we look forward to finishing this before the legislative deadline of May 15th. So on page 16 of your package, just making one change to the recommendation. The recommendation would read that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend that Council approve the 2016 annual financial statements for the city of Namai.
So that's a change?
Yes.
What was the change?
But right now it says the Finance and Audit Committee approve. But I'm saying the Finance and Audit Committee recommend that Council approve.
Oh,
We can't approve it at committee level.
Next. Well,
I'll move that motion.
moved by Councilor Gibbs, seconded by Councilor Fuller. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. And that'll come to us at 2 weeks from now?
correct.
A week Monday, 28th or whatever? What's the date? What will?
I think it's probably
May 8th, thank you. Okay, moving on. Look at us go. C, Downtown Event and Revitalization Funding Program 2017 Downtown Event Grant Recommendations. The purpose is to obtain council approval for the 2017 Downtown Event Grants to support downtown Nanaimo events. Mr. Memo, do you have any comment or any other members of staff before we proceed?
No.
There being none, then would somebody like to move the recommendation in order to get it on the floor?
Move the recommendation, the committee recommend the council to approve the event grant funding recommendation.
Second by Councilor Black. Any discussion? Councilor Brennan.
I'd like to ask staff if any of the event grants that are recommended, do they include administration funds for the entity that will be putting the event on?
We're going to find that right out.
Councilor Brennan, no, the funds that were applied for go directly to putting on the events in the downtown area.
Do they include paying someone to do that?
They may involve a coordinator that would be brought on to help implement the event.
Okay. So, in my view, that's administration,
Okay.
right? So we may find that there are several thousands of dollars in here that are paid to different administrators.
Possibly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any more questions for Mr. Bartlett? Oh, Jerry, Bill.
Thank you. I'm glad to see that there were a lot of interest in this application, and it shows that I think we had discussed of maybe only using a portion of this and saving another portion for a second intake within the year, but obviously that can't possibly happen. My question is, do we have a cap limit? Because what I see from other organizations is our other grants, they take up a lot of money, like up to $85,000 worth of the budget. So with the amount of money that we are only having here, which is $150,000 or $170, whatever it is, are we going to cap that limit? Because I think we should have a cap on these. This is great for seed funding and events to help, but we never discussed a cap, did we?
Currently, right now, the cap would be the 35% of their overall budget.
Well, yeah, but if I were to bring Diana Krall here and say I'm going to do outside, that's going to be $1 million ask, and I can take your entire budget in one event. But I don't like that kind of cap. We should have a money cap going forward. I'm not saying that we need to do this now, but looking at this going forward, I think the next intake room, when we negotiate these and in the terms, we should have a cap, an actual cap. Thank you.
If I might ask Mr. Bartlett and Mr. Bennett, isn't the request is for $115,000? So that is our cap.
That's our total cap. Yeah.
But if one organization took that entire amount,
That would be up to us to make, or that would be up to whatever was brought to this table to make that determination whether or not we would accept one organization or not for such an event. But I think our cap is established. I could be wrong, but we're being asked here for 150. Councillor Yocum has removed himself. Councillor Fong, did you have anything else to follow up?
That was.
Then I had Ian, then I had Diane, and then I had Gord.
Thanks, Chair. So, in response to or follow-up to Councillor Hong's comment, I read that report that our cap was 117. We're giving out 150.
Oh, I meant to each maximum
I see.
allocations, like 15,000 in here, there's 16,000, 16,000, and you get others are getting $450.
Right, I see.
So I wanted to cap at that maximum we give per event, cap that I was asking for.
Okay. So my question, for my curiosity, is Nanaimo Heritage Days. My understanding was a major sponsor, but backed away from that, and I'm pleased to see it's continuing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me who is responsible for organizing that?
I do have the application with me over there. I can get into those details, but it is an organization that has stepped up, and the society was formed, and everything's been transferred to that organization to put the event on. We are hopeful that the amount of money that is being allocated to them is going to help them in leveraging what they need to put on the event.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Good question. Diane and then Gord.
Just looking at, in every instance, I guess, the ask has been greater than the recommendation. So, is it a mathematical calculation you make? Like,
It's not mathematical. With this process, with the Downtown Event Revitalization Fund, there's assessment criteria and requirements that the applicants have to meet.
Mm-hmm.
So the review committee, using those as sort of the benchmark or goal, you want to, what the impact is to the downtown core, what the impact is going to be to the community, what that return on the city's investment is with these groups. You use that as your benchmark. The language in this application reads that applications above the 35% would be reviewed on a case-by-case. But because of the heavy subscription for this program, close to $279,000 for the amount that was available, we decided to use that cap of the 35% as a bench. You'll notice there's two groups that do go a little bit above that. One's a small amount, but we felt that anything less than that may not be impactful for that group. We want to ensure that the funds that are going to these groups are going to be helpful. The other one, the review committee felt that it would have significant impact.
thank you. I'll just add sort of comment that seems like a reasonable way to do this, and so I wouldn't be particularly keen on having an artificial cap when in fact the method we're using now is an assessment of the value of the actual activity that's being proposed. So I wouldn't want to see us artificially cap that. So this seems like a reasonable and really valuable way to do it if we're going to do it at all.
Using the assessment criteria is a valuable tool. It's hard to compare one event to the other because they're so unique in their own way. So having the assessment criteria to evaluate those sort of allows them to be evaluated on their own merit as opposed to comparing to one another.
Thank you. Sorry, I've been using first names and I've been saying councillors, this is and that, so I hope nobody gets offended. Councillor Kohler.
Couple question. With regards to the cap, wouldn't that be the 35% of an event budget? To me, that's a cap.
Basically, yeah.
And I see only one of the approved actually got that 35%.
Yeah, there's the multicultural festival is around 40% of what their ask was, and Lit Nanaimo was around 58%, but again, it was $330. We found that if it was anything less than that, it may not have been a significant investment or impactful to that event.
Oh, okay, I see. They're the ones that are in white and highlighted. Thanks. Previously, with the grants, event grants, things like that, did money go to administrative costs?
Well, depending on the
Like
program,
hiring a coordinator?
culture and heritage grants, is that what you're referring to? Or?
Yeah, whatever, well, the grants that we've allocated this money to, the event grants, any of the event grants, like through the DMBIA, through Culture and Heritage.
We didn't have any, with this program itself, it didn't have those types of restrictions that groups couldn't apply for that, to have an events coordinator assist them, so.
But I'm just asking if, in the past, was there that restriction?
I'm not sure what the DMBA's requirements were with the funding that they formally had. With our culture and heritage grants, there's two programs. There's the operating and projects, so operating could go to administrative grants.
So there is a history of.
Yeah.
Anything else? Councilor Carroll.
Thank you. I'm excited. 23 groups applying for funding. That means a lot of people. If there's a coordinator making some money on it, it's not a problem to me. And that it's not like an 85% of the budget is going towards office costs. So that to me is worth. I noticed a number of new on here. Have you identified how many new?
From what was formerly provided by the DMBIA?
Or any other, like I know the Crescent Days is new. I think Beardorama is new. And then Pride Week, it's the full week, I think, is a new event. So what I'm saying is I'm seeing a few new events pop into here too that I'm excited about too.
Yeah.
There are a number of new
There are a number of new events in here. Beardorama is one I think that has been around, new to apply for funding, but.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
No further questions.
Oh, one follow. With Councillor Fawn's thing, I like the idea with seed funding, where it's a number of years, and they can do that. And that we also have good control now over if people are applying at a number of different stations and how that works out. Whether they can capitalize if we give them something, do they get something more from somebody else? So every dollar we invest is some other group going to invest with us. So that's important to me too on the funding rationales. Thank you.
Thank you. I only have one question, Chris, if I may. Post-event submissions. So do we track the successes of the events and ensure that they were on target and all of those?
Yeah, once the program's up and running, we do require final reports, with final accounting statements. So then we can track. I mean, there's two aspects of that. There's one that we track to ensure that the 35% is indeed 35%, that they weren't overshooting with their original budget. But then there's also to track the impact of what that event was, how successful it was, so that in future years, if they do come back to reapply, we can assess that through that impact.
Thank you. That was the purpose of the question. Thanks. Anything else? Anything else? You're all right.
Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a motion on the floor, so I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thanks very much. Moving to 6D, Federal Gas Tax Fund Strategic Priorities and Grant Fund Application. The purpose is to obtain a council resolution endorsing 3 applications under the Federal Gas Tax Fund Strategic Priorities Fund grant for the 2017 June 1 application deadline. Mr. Member, would you please introduce this for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what we're trying to do here is to identify some projects so we can apply to the gas tax. We're going to make some changes on the language on the recommendations. So the first recommendation, I would probably say that the FAC standing for Finance and Audit, and then number 2 would be that the FAC recommend that council endorse. And that way it becomes cleaner from a governance perspective. And so we have outlined a number of projects and made a recommendation and leave that to debate.
So just some housekeeping for process.
Correct.
I have to get that in at least once. So the recommendations are, would you please read out the recommendations for us, Mr. Member, and then somebody can move them to get them on the floor, and we'll start our discussion.
Sure, I'll do. Recommendation number 1, that the Finance and Audit Committee provide direction on which 2 capital projects they will endorse for the Federal Gas Tax Fund, Strategic Priorities Fund under the Capital Infrastructure Project stream, And 2, that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend that Council endorse the Facilities and Amenities Condition Assessment Program for the Federal Gas Tax Fund strategic priorities under the capacity building stream.
Thank you. Moved by Councilor Thorpe. Well,
Let's pick 2.
I realize that.
I'm assuming you're approving the changes to
Yes.
the wording.
Yeah, I know we have.
So a motion to approve the changing of the wording in recommendation 1 and 2. Moved by Councilor Thorpe, seconded by Councilor Brennan. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. So now we can commence discussion on the options that have been presented to us and on page 86, 87, and 88. There are 6 or 7
So
options.
staff could actually help you with that process for context. And so between Ms. Duncan and Ms. Laurie, they just walk you through some of their thoughts, then you can choose.
May I please suggest that we just start with option 1.1, and then you can just give a brief descriptor so that we can have that understanding, and then ask questions, and then we'll start our debate.
Okay, I'll just give you a quick rundown. It makes it a little bit easier. So there's 2 streams to this funding program. One is for capital projects, and one is for capacity building. So for the capital projects, we've identified 4 projects, and we want you to choose 2. And then for the capacity building, we actually only identified 1 project that we would like to apply for, so we're just seeking your approval to go ahead and apply for that. So for the capital projects one, we've identified 4 projects. We had a group of managers sit down and discuss what we thought would be the best projects that meet the criteria best. And we came up with the CNG automated refuse collector trucks, because we've recently approved to go automated in our garbage collection. Improvements to the waterfront walkway, or expanding the waterfront walkway. The emergency water supply project that we have in the budget for 2017-2018, and that's to share a water supply in the event of emergency with Harmac. And then work in the Boxwood connector, which has been a big transportation project that's been on the books for a while.
Thank you. I'll open it up to questions. You're okay with that?
Yeah.
Councilor Kipp.
No questions.
Councilor Hall.
Thank you. Boxwood connector, I'm still a little confused on why we need that connector, because it's just connecting where the CNG plant is now, the gas station, around the corner to connect to Bowen Road to bypass Northfield. Is that it? Just a little loop?
It creates a southern access from Bevan Park to access the parkway. Instead of the traffic all coming out of the north exit of Bevan Park, the road plan makes an intersection, lit intersection at the south entrance to Bevan Park, right across from Bevan House, and it cuts across the old swamp and cuts out, and people can get to the parkway to get away from going on to Bowen Road and cutting back across the traffic they found over the years. So it was a traffic plan from quite a long time ago. And then that circle between Northfield and all that could be developed. There's a plan for a cul-de-sac coming in off of Northfield into that behind the church, so that probably could eventually be developed.
Yeah, I just find that $11 million just seems a little excessive. We could just put a light there. Because that's the biggest problem, is getting out of Bevan Park. Going south is next to impossible. So, but that, again, that's something, I just can't justify that, especially when we just had a report yesterday.
So might I just interject there? So questions for our speaker and any other staff that might be able to sort of respond to those questions accordingly, and then we can move into motions for discussion on the 2 of the 4 that we would like to choose. So if there's no more questions, rather than just commentary, Diane, or Councilor Bennett, sorry.
Yeah, I have a question. Would staff have an opinion on these 4, and which should be, I think it's 4, isn't it? 5, 4, and which is the best bang for our buck and have we relied on it in the factoring in?
Yep. So when the program does come out and they make the announcement for the grant funding, we send out an email to all city managers or most city managers saying that these are the criteria, these are the project categories that we can apply for, and they're all invited to bring forward their ideas. And then we have a meeting, and we invite management to that meeting, and we discuss those options and what we think, timing-wise, dollar value-wise, and also from the grantor's perspective, something that's a bit of a seller, what they want to give money to, because that's always a big part of it for them as well. And then we sit down as a group and we discuss that and decide together, and this is what we've shortlisted and what's already in the financial plan.
And are they equally weighted in staff's view, or is there one of the four that in staff's view holds more weight than the other?
So for context, and process, Mr. Chair, what you're doing today are funding options. The merits of these projects you've debated and agreed that they should be in your capital plan. So this is not about we should be doing this project or not. It's whether we could apply for this, and through staff's work, as Ms. Laurie has said, the four award staff would say, hey, you know what, this could qualify based on criteria. The priority side of it, you already decided they are priorities. So at this point, really, it's which one of these should we go with?
So they will all go ahead. The question is, which one? Just two will go ahead.
What's your ask?
Just for the grant, but all these projects are going ahead. They've already been approved in the plan.
That's my question. They'll all go ahead.
Yeah.
The question is, do we get the money from the feds or do we get it ourselves? But the budget, in the end of the day, will not change.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
If I may, Chair, thanks. I think my question is what I thought Councillor Brennan was asking, and that is not that we haven't discussed these as priorities. I recognize that. I recognize we're making political decisions. But in terms of the criteria for receiving the grant, is staff in a position to say we feel there's a better chance that this item would be successful compared to another item? Not in terms of our priorities, but in terms of the grant criteria, or has that been considered?
Okay, I think we have in getting to this, but from the experience of Ms. Laurie, not putting you on the spot, because the people who evaluate these, they will get the two that we give them, and they'll evaluate them, and they'll apply their own, their minds to it. But the question that I think you are asking is to say, out of these four, which two do you think would have a better chance? I think that's the ask that Councilman.
If it's possible to answer.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think, in my opinion, the Boxwood connector would probably be the least successful out of the four. But I definitely think the remaining three are pretty close. Any kind of emergency plan is always really high in the Fed's point of view, right? So that one's a good seller. The refuse collector trucks, because we are opting to go CNG, that has a big, impact on reduced GHG emissions for the city, which is a good seller. And waterfront walkway, to me, that's politically the best sell for the feds, because they can have a nice sign on the waterfront saying that they've contributed money to make this space beautiful.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Any more questions? I just have one question, if I might, please, and that it's related to the waterfront walkway.
okay.
And when we make these applications, and the strength of the applications in collaboration, and so when we're talking about the walkway to continue to the estuary, which would include First Nations benefits, do we seek SFN's participation in this application? Because as we know, oftentimes that's not bad lever to have in an application process. So I'm just curious if we thought that far ahead.
Their cooperation hasn't been discussed yet, but usually in our applications, we look often for support letters. So that might be something that we seek out to get for community support letters to send in with the application, but that's the only discussion that we've had about that so far.
Any other questions for staff?
Anything over receipt of the report?
I think those just questions.
Okay.
You're just being asked some questions, so thank you very much. Alrighty, so if we just refer then back to page 85, there's two recommendations.
Well, no, okay. I would like to make a recommendation. I support number 2 and number 3.
Well, my apologies. Yes, we voted. So, Councillor Kipp has put a motion on the floor that we recommend option 2, which is the waterfront walkway, and option 3, which is the emergency water supply. Is there a second?
Second.
Question.
You had your hand up first, Diane. Did you want to put this on the floor and then discuss it, or?
I would just like to say that I think we should put them on the floor individually, so that I may agree with Jim on one side of it, but not the other. So just test how much support there is for them individually, rather than coupling them and then having to make a choice for two, whereas I might just want one of those things.
So Sarah Adam at least.
So I think that's
Sarah Adam at least. Okay,
So if you want to draw your
number 2
motion.
first.
Okay.
To talk.
And if my only comment is so seconded, and I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. And just for discussion purposes, my only thought was we try to identify that out of the 4, the one. Like the most, so if, and I'm just trying to gather a consensus that if our consensus is that number 2 is our first choice, then we can beat each other up for the second out of the 4, or 3 remaining.
No beating.
We can beat it up, not each other. Any discussion on number 2?
You voted?
Just call the question.
You called it.
Oh, did I call the question too?
Yeah, we voted. Done.
Oh, wow.
You're up.
Awesome.
Well,
Hey, we have done it. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that we voted on that. I thought we. Okay, cool.
we raised our hands.
Nice.
First reading that one.
Victor, did you hear that? Did you get that down as a procedural process?
That was a very fast process.
That sure was. I agree with you. Okay, so number 2 is approved.
Number 2, I guess, is in, so you need to
All right.
take another one.
Well, it'll be.
Second.
Well,
So
I'm
that
going to number 3, which
staff
is for the emergency management part of it, the water system. These 2 projects we've talked about here are a lot of outstanding projects. I do concern myself when we're pumping non-potable water into our system, but it would be required in an emergency management system drawn from the Harmac aquifers. And I think it's a good one to do in the long-term effects for our community. The lines exist
So
now.
can I just interrupt? Do we have a motion?
Yeah, I made a motion for number
Second.
3.
But we haven't had a seconder.
Oh,
Seconded by Councillor Hahn. Discussion.
well, point of process, we had moved 2 of them and said we didn't Sarah Adam, so you have to vote again. That's just process. Sorry. No, I'm in favor of number 3. So,
Councillor Brennan.
The SFN has always been interested, have an interest in anything we do with the water, particularly the water in out there around Harmac. So what has this been taken to them? Are they in agreement? Is it something that they've raised their profile on, or what?
So through the chair, I don't have any information on that. I know it's a project in our books, but whether we've done any consultation to that extent or not. So what I'm hearing is we haven't got that far.
We haven't gone that far yet, but this is an application for funding in this fiscal year.
It's a project we have,
Mhm.
so the stage is in project. We've just identified this as a possible project that.
But we
fund.
haven't obtained the support of our SFN grant.
Just through the chair, one of the things about projects is we need council to give us the go-ahead before we would proceed in those negotiations with other bodies. I'm not aware of what the chief administrative officer has done with negotiations, perhaps that may have occurred, but as far as my understanding, that's the normal way we go through processes with these.
Follow up with Councilor Brennan and then Councilor Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. McRae. So the only worry I have is that we set this up for applying for the funds, and then we go into negotiations with the SNANEMA. And ultimately, they're not in favor. Have we missed out then on this money? I have that fear. For that reason then, because I don't know the answer to that, I can't support the emergency water supply because I don't know whether we would have the capacity and the agreements in place to go ahead with it, and we might then miss out on that money.
I have Councilor Fuller, Councilor Hong, and then Mr. Mehmet, if you want to weigh in on any other information.
Okay, the emergency water supply one is interesting because it's SFN involvement. Waterfront walkway is interesting because it's SFN involvement. So we look at the waterfront walkway and connecting with SFN and getting their support on this. It's politically good. I could see doing the same thing with the emergency water supply. If they choose not to, I mean, that would be one of the first things you would do is connect with SFN if it's decided to do it. And if they choose not to follow through with it, would there be enough time to pick another one? Or would we just follow through with it without their involvement? It's the same with the waterfront walkway. They both require that SFN thing. And it is very politically motivating for the federal government to approve anything to do with First Nations. Now, I don't know whether, what's his name would get his picture on this one, but no, it's offered.
Thank you, Chair. Or Councilor Hong.
Thank you. I disagree with Councillor Brennan even. I think the SFN has wanted water for a long time. Finally given them water. And now that we have an actually emergency backup system that's going to guarantee them water, even though they have to boil it, is a safety thing that I can't see why they would not support. Not that I could speak for them, but if our pump station at Jump Lake goes down, we have no water. We don't have water. SFN won't have water.
We've got some storage.
Yeah, some stored, but having this pump station would ensure that we have a supply of water for the First Nations and the Nanaimo as an emergency backup. So I can't see that being a huge issue with them because they already know we have an agreement. The agreement's already in place since 2011. They haven't said anything with regards to that that I'm aware of that they're beating out. That's why I support it. When I look at the other two, the CNG garbage collectors, well, you know what? If I live in a condo, those garbage collectors do nothing for me. I'm not paying for those. So why would I use my money? And why would the feds give me money when it doesn't benefit all of the people that I'm on? So that one's off the table right off the bat because it doesn't benefit the entire community. And the only ones that I see that benefited is the waterfront and the emergency supply. You know, the Boxwood connector, again, if we're going to do anything, I'd rather apply for the Northfield connector and get them to pay that money and pay off ICF to get that done, as opposed to this Boxwood one, because I don't see a value in this one at this time being, considering we just went through development yesterday that they're going to connect the bottom of Boxwood out to East Wellington. So, you know, I can see if we didn't have that bottom piece connecting through East Wellington to flow out some of that traffic in the Boxwood area, I would consider this, but at this point, maybe next year. That's what I can say. That's why I support 2 and 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Member, did you want to weigh in?
Yes, I'm going to ask Mr. Lindsay to speak. And I think what he's going to say applies to both 2 and 3. And then I may have an off-ramp for you in terms of deciding which one. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think just in terms of the comments about SFN and our discussions, I would say keep in mind with the walkway projects that we're talking about here are 5 specific projects. Outside of those 5 projects, we have an overall plan that's underway looking at the trail network from Departure Bay to the estuary. So the consultant's been engaged. SFN, we've had ongoing discussions with SFN, and we'll continue to have those discussions as we go through that overall plan. They are aware of that planning process. They are also aware of these 5 specific capital projects that we've talked about that are part of this ask. Whether technically their approval will be required will not be something we'll know until we go through the detailed design for each of these projects. So if technically, if it's a land-based trail, it would not require the approval of the feds, which would not technically have that requirement for SFN approval. However, if it was like a cantilevered system or a piered system that was over the water, it would definitely trigger those requirements. Aside from those technical formal approvals, we still are discussing all of these projects with SFN, and will continue to do so.
Any questions for Dale or Mr. Lindsay? And that's as it relates to our water trail waterfront. But did you have any comments you'd like to pass along on the emergency water subject matter?
No, I don't believe I could have anything that I would add to that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Is there any other questions before we vote on number 3? My only comments would be 1 and 4 are really difficult for me to support. So with my process of elimination for me, I can't imagine an emergency water supply doesn't have a real value to it that could be seen to be very well received at the next level where this application would go to. So if it could supply water to the entire city on an emergency basis, that might be their number 1 over the waterfront upgrade. So I'm certainly in favor of number 3 based on what we have remaining. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Opposed, Councilor Brennan? Balance in favor. Thank you. We shall move on.
Item 2.
To item 2, which was the
Capacity building.
Yeah, I'll move staff recommendation.
So moved by Councilor Holmes, seconded by Councilor Kemp. Any discussion? And that is on page 88. Any discussion? Well, Councilor Kemp.
Anything to move our asset management program forward is an important one going into the future. With the facts and figures we've heard over the last while, it's important for us. Well, I support this as it's moving condition assessment program forward. I think that's a good one for the future.
Thank you. Any other comments? Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. The E. Mr. Mehmet has a financial plan update, and it's to update the F&C committee on key changes. Are you going to do that, or something?
Yes, Ms. Duncan will do that quickly. This is the information, so it's probably going to be quick for us. Just to say that this is a follow-up to the discussion we had last week, and we will have the financial plan amendment bylaw at Monday's meeting. We also have the property tax bylaw at Monday's meeting for the first 3 readings. I'll yield to Ms. Duncan in case you want to update any changes to this, but it reflects the discussion we had last week.
just quick follow-up to last week, is in order to reduce the property tax increase back to the 1.5%. What we have done is we'll delay implementing the debt stabilization reserve. We'll make that part of our reserve policy review in council later this year. And basically delaying that allows us to still go ahead with the road repairs and the increase in SNC budgets, snow and ice control budgets, and keep it at 1.5% property tax increase.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Duncan? Chair, Councillor Hong and Councillor Brennan.
Thank you. On page 89, the last two bullets, can you have some clarification for me? $600,000 funding change from annual property acquisition allocation from general reserves to strategic infrastructure reserves, and $75,000 revenue decrease for investment income. So number one, $600,000 was what we were going to put into property acquisition into that reserve, right? So now you're saying you're rolling that into strategic infrastructure reserve?
So we're funding that out of the strategic infrastructure reserve instead of general taxes. It's just a change in funding.
Okay, so the $600,000 for property acquisition is coming from infrastructure reserve.
Correct.
Okay.
And then the $75,000, that's a read of the market as we see it, and the past performance, and is what it is.
Okay, and then we were going to have a discussion on investment. Was something that was last year that we were promised that we have a look at where our portfolio. I know you said we were limited on what we can do with our money, but we were going to have a.
You can't just.
No, I know, but well, the government doesn't let us spend our money, but we were going to have a look at that, how that money.
Sure, I think as part of this COP, we'll take a look at what we do as an information, and Laura and the team will provide that and give you a sense of what we do.
Thank you.
Councilor Bright.
I'm having trouble reading this. The $349,000 expenditure increase for RCMP contract, this is recommendation not to go ahead with that, or is it to go ahead?
We're going ahead. We're funding that.
Okay, all right. And we're funding the increase in wages, obviously, and 2 new positions.
That's already funded.
Okay.
From last year.
Oh, last year. 2016. I'm sorry, that's okay. This is going to sound stupid. Why is it showing up here as 2017? But
So there is always an increase on the contract,
yeah.
And that's what we're reflecting now.
Yeah,
That's
it's 2 new positions.
It's not the 2 new positions.
A $1.3 million expenditure increase for wages and 2 new positions.
Oh, that's for staff. Sorry, I was confusing that with the RCMP.
Oh, okay.
So this 1.3 is to our general operations, not necessarily RCMP.
And not the civilians at the RCMP?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Wait. I have one more. $1.3 million revenue decrease due to transition of casino and sports revenues to new reserve for strategic projects. So the programs that we formerly funded through the casino funds will no longer go ahead.
They will go ahead. So if you recall, at December 19, 2016, when the strategic infrastructure reserve was set up, the strategy was we were going to transition the casino money over time and replace whatever programs we were using that money for through general taxes. So those programs go through general taxes. We're simply reflecting the plan that you agreed on in December to phase this over time.
Right. Okay.
No other questions?
Clarify that for me is, it's not a cut, it's a change of
funding.
Where it's sourced from, right, what line item it comes under, and that's it. Programs you
Programs to make.
Question? Yes.
Yeah, as soon as everybody.
So,
Is there any other first time speakers that would like to talk or ask a question? Councilor Bright.
You know, 4 months is a long time in politics. My memory doesn't go back that far all the time. So with regard to the transition of the casino and Fortis, why do we choose to do it that way instead of fund it through general taxation every year? Why do we choose to use that instead of?
So through the chair, we can provide you back the report we provided to you on December 19, and we can discuss that.
Okay, you should do that then, because I'm not objecting to it. I just don't know what the basis of the decision is.
Sure.
Why we would prefer this to that.
Yeah, so we'll pull the report we provided December 19 and send it to council, and you guys can bring it up and discuss it.
Might I just suggest that whenever we reconvene this committee, 2 weeks from now, 4 weeks from now, that it's an agenda item at this committee?
Sure.
We've already done it.
Yeah.
It's already
It's just information.
approved. It's just for information, so we can do that here, can we not? Would this be a procedurally appropriate place to do it?
It's just information. I mean, the issue is already done. You can't consider that it's done. So it's just information. That's why I thought I would just send you the report. That's it.
Tracy, would you like to?
And I just suggest that you watch the video. You have your deliberations and discussions around this agenda item on the Finance and Audit Committee videos. That's helpful.
Yeah, so when you send out the report, could you just send out the date of the discussion and the link to it?
Sure.
Thank you. I only have one question, if I might. And I'm assuming that the $1.3 million expenditure increase from wages, which includes the 2 positions of 2016, is based on a 2% increase on wait, is that how that number was arrived? I'm just trying to determine how we arrived at $1.3 million.
So yes, it is, it's for 2017, not 2016. So the 1.3 million includes estimate, because of course the QP contract actually expired in 2016. So we have an estimate of what the contract increase will be. We have the IAFF contract increase and the 2 new positions.
Thank you. Which leads me to the next question. What, from an HR perspective, if anybody can help me, have we commenced first stage of negotiations, or any stage of negotiations? Is there any intention to commit this since it's expired? What are we meeting? What are we discussing? What are we doing?
We'll bring that through offline, probably in camera conversation. We'll bring that to you.
Thank you very much. So here we are then. Is that the completion of the report for information?
Yes.
Move the report be received for information.
Second. Moved by Councilor Kidd, second by Councilor Hong. Any other questions? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thanks very much, Danny. Our other business. No other business. Question periods. I see a member in the gallery, Mr. Barkley. Oh, member. Stand over there. You, we can. I don't know. Do we have to do it over here? I don't. Sure. Come on. Maybe I can hear karaoke. You have to start with the karaoke. Just that's how you get to this. Stand by me.
Sounds okay. I have 3 quick comments and 2 questions. One comment.
Just question period.
Yes. Very quick comments and questions that are related. The comment is that for the public, it's very difficult to hear in this room the discussions. I know listening to the video, it's very hard to hear whether it's staff or council. But being in the room, it's also very difficult to hear because of the way the sound moves. Well, so there's a question I'll add. Is there a plan to improve the acoustics in the room? I know there is a plan to improve the acoustics for video, but is there a plan to improve the acoustics in the room?
Yes, there is. Actually, between tomorrow and Friday,
Yes.
Somebody's going to be working here to improve the sound.
In the room. Good. Okay. And two comments. One, I'm disturbed by the almost 6% growth in expenses. Looking at the on the on the agenda, page 24, and also the what appears to be $18.5 million in overtaxation. So those are two comments. My question, one, could someone please explain the 11.3% increase for policing expense? Again, this is from the agenda, the financial statements on page 24. There's approximately a $3 million increase in policing expenditure. That's my first question.
I'm hoping Mr. Mela can, but I know that there's been approximately 5.4% increase, or approximately 5% increase. And then I believe we're adding 2 members and then maybe some civilian members too, but I would have to default to Mr. Mela to answer why it's 11.3%.
So what happens is, Ms. Duncan will give you the details, but at a high level, the policing contract, really the cost, the negotiations of the cost really is driven by feds. And so that discussion happens elsewhere. We simply contract with them and we have to, there's very few picking and choosing that we do on priorities, but that cost driver is really what happens at that level. The other one has to do with the services that they provide us. There's things that cost more if you had, for lack of a better example, if you had a major incident happen in the Nile, that does increase your costs because those things become additional. But for the for the increase right now, I don't know if Ms. Duncan has a specific item that's showing up.
This is actually probably more Laura's because it's 2016 actuals that I think was asking about.
So the biggest increase, the biggest chunk of the increase for 2016 was at the end of the year. We had to accrue $1.6 million for retro pay in the RCMP contract settlement. And it's looking like now it'll come in less than that, but we didn't know that till just last week. So that is the biggest chunk of that increase.
So the other 1.5, I think it's 1.5 million approximately. That is a combination of increased staffing and wage increase. Is that right?
That's correct. Now, this is the other piece that may be confusing to somebody looking from outside. Your policing costs, the actual costs, they do this every year based on vacancies and incidents that happen. So you may think that it's an increase in cost, but really I think you need to go to the budget side of it because your vacancies and your incidents, they give you this yo-yo kind of actuals over time. But what remains constant is probably the budget because that's where your taxation really happens.
So, Councillor Bestwick mentioned a 5% increase. Was that the settlement? I'm not aware of what the 2016.
That's the retro. That's the retro.
That's the wage increase retro.
That was retro and 2016.
And will impact us in 2017.
I see. Okay. All right. My second question, maybe it's simpler. Just looking also page 24, the water expenses grew by 31%. That's $4.4 million. I kind of thought that we have a new system for water in the city that it would be more efficient and reduce the annual expenditure. So can someone explain what the 31% increase?
It was a full year of water. There was a full year of water treatment plant operation in 2016. So in 2015 there wasn't a full year. So more operating costs for the building.
So this has come in, and so every year that we'll see that additional 4.4 million.
Not necessarily. You're now seeing the full impact of a new plant.
Mm-hmm.
Additional capacity, additional standards of treatment. So what she's saying is in the last statements, you only saw a partial year.
Right.
This is now a full year, which should stabilize.
I see. Okay.
It's under budget.
Yes, yeah, I forgot about that.
It's under budget.
Okay.
So, look at that one.
Yeah. Right. That's all. Thank Thank you.
Very much, appreciate it, good questions.
To adjourn.
Moved by Councilor Fong to adjourn, second by Councilor Thorpe, all in favor? Opposed, carried. Our next